Hello, it's Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist. So going back to another clip from many, many years ago, probably from the golden age, I would say, of the atheist experience. So we've got Mike calling in from San Jose, and he's calling in to say that he's discovered many truths in Christianity. Now, unfortunately, during the length of the call, neither Matt nor Tracie asks him specifically what truths. I suppose when I think about Christianity itself, I can't imagine that there's any other truth really that matters in Christianity than the central claim of the resurrection and that Jesus is the Son of God. And obviously tied to that there is a God as well. So he eventually started talking about near-death experiences because he's saying that his own reason for believing is personal experience, but he's seen that other people have had experiences too. He's already been on the ad populum fallacy and said that belief in heaven is so common that it should be more or less accepted as true. Matt obviously has rebutted that. But they're now talking about near-death experiences. So let's just have a listen to what they've got to say.
Well, judging from the fact that I'm not really a scientist and neither is Tracie, I would...
Okay, so Tracie has actually said that her explanation, or one possible explanation, for the fact that people have got these feelings, sort of euphoria or whatever, when they're on the point of death and they're revived, resuscitated, and they report these experiences, is that the brain is trying to construct some way of helping the person through these last experiences, producing lots of endorphins to give them this sort of euphoria, and that could be an explanation. And now Mike is turning around and saying, well, Tracie's not a scientist, so how can she make that claim? I'm not a scientist either. And okay, so let's continue.
I would say,
how is that at all relevant to my question?
Because you have to know exactly how the brain works.
No.
Yeah. Now this is the thing. He brings up this thing about, well, you're not a scientist, and yet Christians all the time are phoning in saying, how can something come from nothing? Talking about dark matter and quantum physics, all sorts of stuff, and they're not scientists at all. And yet, when you say that there could be alternative explanations for near-death experiences, you don't have to be a scientist, any kind of scientist, to make that statement. There could be another explanation other than a supernatural explanation. In fact, I'd be surprised if most scientists wouldn't actually agree with that statement.
No, you don't have to be.
Well, no, we know. Well,
Stop.
wait a second. We know that the brain dies as it's deprived of oxygen. It starts to die within a few. I mean, this is not something that you have to be a neurologist to understand.
But you
Your
don't
brain
know that
will
the brain's
die.
going to make you see heaven.
But you do understand that when people are deprived of oxygen, and there are specific limits where you'll start to have brain damage, so that when you are brought back, your brain is damaged in certain ways because of that oxygen deprivation, correct? I mean, that's not even...
Not all the time.
No, I'm saying that...
Yeah, okay, I looked into this. It's 5 minutes. If the brain is starved of oxygen for more than 5 minutes, and it can be less than 5 minutes, obviously the longer it's starved of oxygen, the higher the likelihood of irreversible brain damage. But it definitely is more than 5 minutes, and you are irreversibly, I mean, without exception, you are irreversibly brain damaged. You would not be coming back resuscitated, able to say anything at all. You'd be living the rest of your life as a vegetable. So these assertions that people are, virtually dead are just untrue.
there are certain limits where you go beyond, where the brain doesn't have oxygen for certain amounts of time, and it starts to damage. Parts of the brain will start to die as you don't have oxygen. This goes for your body as well.
Okay,
I mean, you can't deprive.
You're also, Mike, you're also aware that not everybody sees the same thing, that near-death experiences vary, and they don't even always tie to the same religious imagery, right?
Did you put him on hold?
For a particular imagery is a funny word, because a lot of the near-death experiences that I've heard about, they don't really describe imagery at all.
Okay, then you haven't remotely studied this.
Well, okay, let me just say a few words, because I've looked into this. And the reason I've looked into this is because one of my sort of pet hate claims is on near-death experiences. I've had so many arguments and debates with mainly Christians over the years, and I've had to go and do the research just to rebut them, not on my own channel, on other channels. And usually when I definitively rebut them, they just go silent. I never hear from them again, because I know about the two big studies, the AWARE studies. Sam Parnia is the mastermind of those. He believes in a supernatural connection, a supernatural cause of these claims. He already believes that. Nevertheless, he set up two studies, the AWARE studies. There's the AWARE 1 study, which was a study of, I think there were 2,100 cases of people who've been resuscitated. And out of those, only 100 could remember anything at all. I mean, you know, could actually fill in the form. The rest of them are just a complete blank. Of those, they determined that 6 were what they would class as near-death experiences. So bear that in mind, 6 out of 2,100. And of those, only 1 produced anything remotely interesting, namely that a woman had heard certain things in a theatre when she was supposedly unconscious. So that's the AWARE 1 study. The AWARE 2 study, which followed several years later, was a bit more sophisticated. Of course, the AWARE 1 study also had the digital display on the screen. In some cases, that drew a complete blank. The AWARE 2 study, it involved fewer cases, but they did a bit more. They had an EEG hooked up, and that was one big disappointment as well. It didn't reveal anything. It didn't get the NDE crowd. It didn't cheer them up at all, and it didn't get the case anywhere for any supernatural claims or that there's a spirit going off to heaven or anything like that. So I'm very well clued up on near-death experiences. When people say there are a ton of cases, what they're usually referring to are the books that have been written, where people have collected all the anecdotes they can find around the world, but they're outside of scientific study, and they've simply compiled all the anecdotes in a book, and they've gone to Amazon and sold it to all the mugs out there and made millions. So quite a lot of the time, that's what people are referring to. I only talk about scientific studies myself. I don't talk about anecdotal evidence. So as regards scientific studies, there's no good evidence to back up that near-death experiences point to anything supernatural. Okay. You
just haven't. You do realize that people who are Catholic are more likely to. You do.
Yeah. I mean, actually, oddly enough, I do believe Matt here is possibly, he's not referring to the AWARE studies, because the AWARE studies turned up absolutely nothing of anything, any religious iconography or imagery at all. I mean, it was so banal and boring. It was just absolutely unreal. No, I think Matt may well be referring to some of the material that he's read of what I just described. These books compiling all the kind of anecdotal evidence around the world.
Realize that people who are Catholic are more likely to see the Virgin Mary and saints, and people who are Protestant are less likely to see those, and people who have near-death experiences from other religions are likely to see the imagery associated with their religion, right? Have you at least looked into it that far?
I mean, I know it's possible that they can assume that's what they saw, and they come back and say, this is what I think I saw, but none of them claim that that is specifically what they saw and that they know it.
You're wrong. You're just factually freaking wrong. You're just making shit up. Nobody comes back and says this. Yeah, they do. They come back and say all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, the thing is, what he's getting at there is, as a Christian, is that a Muslim is having a near-death experiences. He thinks he sees Muhammad or Allah, because that's the culture he was brought in. But in reality, he actually saw Jesus Christ, but he just didn't realize it because he's a Muslim. I find that hilarious.
Yes. You're so desperate to find some way out of the logical arguments. We don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to have any other understanding.
We could hold you underwater to demonstrate the brain dies without oxygen, but it's like, I mean, at some point you just have to...
It doesn't even matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter if we know anything at all about the brain. We don't have to know anything about science. All we have to do is look at the claims. And here we have a natural world where something unexplained has happened. And we are looking for explanations that fit as many of the facts as possible. Let's build a model that is the best explanation of those facts. Do Tracie or I or any scientist on the planet, are we absolutely sure that near-death experiences where people see an afterlife, see a heaven, are false? No. And that's not what anybody's claiming. But you have looked at this based on your own experience and decided, the best explanation is for me to take this natural world and add a whole nother supernatural element to it.
That hasn't been demonstrated yet.
That hasn't been demonstrated. That you agree there's no mechanism by which we can investigate it. It becomes an unfalsifiable proposition. And your justification for this is that other people have made this same mistake in reason. That other people have these beliefs. And every time we try to point out some of this, it's, well, you guys aren't scientists. Okay, it's not relevant. What's relevant is the logical argument and the evidence supporting it. That's it. That's all that's ever relevant. The logical arguments and the evidence supporting it. And when you can expose that the logical argument supporting something is fallacious, then the conclusion is we have no way of telling if the conclusion is true or not from that logical argument. We have no way of telling.
Absolutely correct. And also he says you guys are not scientists. Maybe what they should do for people who, pull that nonsense is have the figures there. How many neurosurgeons believe that near-death experiences are evidence for the supernatural? And I'm fairly certain that the higher up you go, the less you'll find. It would probably be something like, 5%. And then put that to him and say, okay, well, all right, that's a fallacious argument, but if you want to go by that, only 5% of scientists, neurosurgeons actually believe. So, yeah, okay, fine.
And if you then say, well, I'm going to believe it, because it just seems true to me, then you're demonstrating that you don't actually care about what's true. You care about what feels good. You're so discomforted by the idea of not knowing that you're willing to go with, hey, this is what most people believe, so I'll just run with it. Sorry, that's not a good reason to believe things.
Yeah, what I found hilarious, I have not put this into because, it's too long a call to include everything, but earlier on in the conversation, Matt was talking about alien abductions because Mike had brought up UFOs. And Matt pointed out that there are witnesses and there are people who've got the alien abduction stories, and do you believe them? And he said, well, no, not really, don't really believe that. And then Matt said, yeah, you believe in the resurrection. We've got far less evidence and no living witnesses, no eyewitnesses, and just claimed eyewitnesses in a 2,000-year-old text, and yet you don't believe living, breathing people. So that's another bizarre thing. Different standards. It's confirmation bias. He wants to believe in Jesus, so it's as William Lane Craig said, it's such an attractive belief, you've got to lower the bar and then believe it on that basis because it just feels too good. Okay, that's all for now. I'll be back again with another clip soon. Bye for now.